Toronto is considering barring landlords from increasing rent between tenancies. In today's video, I'm going to share why that is a terrible idea and a case study of a country that has actually done the right thing to help reduce this crazy demand that we have when it comes to rental prices increasing and to actually allow tenants more selection at affordable prices. If you're new to my channel, my name is Koukun. I'm a real estate investor and I run a real estate team that helps investors buy and sell rental properties. Let's get into it. So here is the article that I was reading. So Toronto is considering barring landlords from raising rents between tenants. And it talks about how Toronto rent prices are expensive enough, and due to the current rent control regulations, which restrict how much rent you can increase while you have a tenant living in a property, that is causing some landlords to do renovictions where they say they're going to renovate the property to kick the tenant out, and after that they increase the rent quite a bit. So the reason they're considering this, so you can see even in this article here, the Toronto's top housing official is asking the province to not allow rent increases between tenants. So far the rent controls only apply while a tenant lives in the property. And you can see here in 2023, despite the 8 or 9% inflation we're seeing overall in the CPI, rent are only allowed to increase by 2.5% per year. So your utility bills as a landlord, your interest rate, and all your costs are going up significantly higher, but you can only increase your rent by 2.5%. So anyways, that is the reality of owning a rental property in the province of Ontario. Why is rent control a bad thing? So in this article in Bloomberg, it says rent control does more harm than good, and it's been tested by economists who looked at various case studies, because we now have multiple decades of histories with cities that choose to have rent control and cities that don't, especially in the States. New York and California, there are cities that are very strong proponents of not California, Los Angeles, strong proponents of rent control. And you can see in states like Texas, and there's quite a few states that have no rent controls, no restrictions, and also very little red tape when it comes to building new housing. So it's been said in some cases, rent controls are probably the second best way to destroy a city, and the first way is to bomb it. So that's how extreme some people have seen rent controls. Why is this a problem? As most people, when you think about should rents increase at 20% a year, when you see these crazy headlines, rents have doubled in the last 2 years or whatever the case, no one likes that scenario. Some people think that landlords love to hear headlines like that. We don't. It's not necessarily a society that is thriving. There is a segment of the population that is hurting a lot. So I understand where these kind of policies and ideas come from. It doesn't come from a bad place. It is trying to protect people who are being hurt by the current system. The question is the solution going to fix the problem, or is it going to have more unintended consequences? Right now, with the current rent control legislation that restricts rent increases from for existing tenants, already that has dampened rental housing activity since the 90s when it was implemented. Prior to the 90s, there was a lot of construction of rental housing. You can see there's so many, in the province of Ontario especially, there's so many apartment buildings that were built in the 70s, the sort of brick apartment building structures that you see all around Toronto. There's been many decades when people haven't built more of those purpose-built rental apartments. Instead, what do you see in the skyline in Toronto? Most of the buildings you see are condominiums, buildings that are built and then sold off, whether it's to investors or to homeowners, right? Why is this a problem? A investment property that is bought, or a condo that's bought by an investor, is not really a stable form of housing for the tenant, because if the investor wants to move into the property, the tenant has to leave. There's no long-term security that they can live in the property. Why are there not more rental housing apartments being built? I listened to a talk given by a someone who represented an association for these large REITs and apartment building owners. These are the institutions that currently own most of the apartment buildings, the larger apartment buildings. When you look at a 100, 200 unit apartment building in a city like Toronto, it's typically not owned by a person. It's typically owned by these pension funds or REITs. These companies have money that they want to deploy that can earn them a decent rate of return. When I say decent, for most individual investors like myself, I would not consider investing money at such a low rate of return that they are willing to. And the reason they are willing to invest money at a low rate of return is that they have a lot of money that they need to grow in order to fulfill future pension obligations, whatever it is, right? They have money that can be put to work. The reason they cannot put money into rental housing, as per this person I was listening to who represented this association, was that in order for it to make economic sense for them to create rental housing, they need to be able to increase rents by 3% a year. 3%, not 10%, not 20%, 3%. And with the current rent control legislation, it was under the threshold that would make it a feasible investment, given the cost that comes in creating rental housing, to create an apartment building, to get the permits from the city, to pay the contractors, to build the structure, to have management, to lease out the units and take care of ongoing issues. All of that can be done for them if they can rent it out at the market rate when they start and increase it at 3% a year. So going back to this idea, why is this bad? Well, what happens is you are now putting a further restriction. Already, if an apartment building has a vacancy, they can then increase the rent to the market rate. By putting this further restriction, now they can't even adjust it between tenants. You are going to see far less investment into new rental housing. The existing apartment buildings already exist. They're there. They can't move to another province. What can move to other provinces, other cities, other countries is the money that pension funds and investors have that they can use to invest into the creation of rental housing. The challenge in Ontario right now is we have an incredible amount of population growth. So to create housing to meet that demand, we need new houses, we need new rentals, we need new homes people can buy, we need more of all the types of housing stock. And if you create a barrier like this to hinder investment into housing, into the creation of housing, you are going to further make this problem worse. And a barring like this may cause many smaller landlords to simply sell their properties, exit the real estate investing game, or maybe exit and buy a property in a province like Alberta, which does not have any rent controls whatsoever between tenancies or while the tenant lives in the property. Between after a 12-month lease, they can increase it any amount they want. Think about this. Why are rents in Alberta far less than in Ontario? The landlord can increase it as much as they want. The tenant gets to choose whether they live there or move to another apartment. So anyways, let's go into this further. The example I want to give you is a country that I believe has done it right. And this is the country of Japan. Recently, Japan has had a lot of, issues in their economy, and they do have a very homogeneous population where they're not super welcoming to foreigners. So their country is mostly Japanese. They don't get a lot of immigration. What has happened is then, because of that, as their rate of population growth declines, as people are having less children, Their population is actually shrinking now. But what I want to point out is between 1950, that's as far back as this data goes, to around, let's call it the 2000s. So in the 50-year period between 1950 and 2000, they had a population that started around 84 million people, and it went as high in 2010 as 128 million people. That's over a 50% increase over that period. And it's not just a 50% increase, it is a significant number of people. 40 million people is over the population of Canada. So they had to figure out housing for that amount of people. So that is if you think about it, it's crazy. Within a 50-year period, they had to make more housing than currently exists in Canada just to meet the population growth that they experienced. How did they do it? So there's a great article here from Citeline.org that I was reading as I was researching about what's different about Japan compared to Canada, many places in America. And I found this article very insightful. I'll have it in the description below. One of the key points that this article mentioned is this. Japan is the best example of the power of enlargement. Japan's national government controls land use and buildings to a larger degree than do national authorities in other affluent democracies. What does this mean? One of the key reasons we have less development in the province of Ontario is the single family zoning. So majority of the land that is residential, that has services that can be used for housing, has the single family zone. A single family zone is very restrictive because you have quite a lot of land that you can only put one house on. You can't put, now they've recently allowed us to put in-law suites, so you can have 2 apartments in it, but that is far less density than what that land can be used for. And the reason for this is municipalities, cities control land use. And the unfortunate system is that when it comes to land use, at least the officials in the city are elected by the people in the city. The majority of the people in the city own homes. The majority of homeowners want to restrict land use because it's the whole NIMBYism, right? Not in my backyard. They don't want an apartment building next to their house. So as a result, collectively, they push their officials that they elect towards the direction of less development, less allowance of development. And when all cities do this, what you have is this incredible shortage of housing. In Japan, what this article describes, the municipalities don't have that power. The central government has taken it, which I know for those of you who hate central government having powers, this may seem crazy, and I understand that. But in this particular case, it works. And if it works, we need to look at, okay, can this be applied in Canada? So essentially what they've done is that the national control the federal government has decided all of the land use into several zones. So I think there's only 8 or so zoning categories. What happens with this? So with the 8 types of zoning, the least dense residential zone is the equivalent of what we have in Canada, where you can build townhouses and small multifamily properties. So that is the least dense zone. That's very different from the single family zoning. The other aspect is that because they have so little restrictions when it comes to building housing, there's a lot of new housing available that the Japanese population tends to view old used houses as sort of less than the new construction product. So this creates demand for the new product, and many older homes are demolished and the land is reused for more density. So this creates this cycle of creation of new housing. The the demolition of old housing and then the further densifying of the land that housing is on. And it creates a third interesting dynamic that took a long time to truly understand. Houses in Japan do not appreciate in value. A cousin of mine, so I'm half Japanese, and my cousin was sharing that their home is probably worth half of what they bought it for 4 years ago, and they bought it brand new. That just blew my mind. Like, how does your house depreciate in value? The thing is, they paid around $250,000 for a brand new house in Japan, and now it's worth in the hundreds. But their plan is to use it till they pay it off, and their view on housing is not that of investment but rather of consumption. This is a product they are using. The reason for that is because there's so much construction of housing does not go up in value. Rather, land goes up in value, but the house that sits on the land depreciates in value, and as such, people don't price housing in the hopes that its value is going to increase further. For the most part, there are some cases even in Japan where housing does increase. So you can see Japan demolishes homes much sooner than other industrial countries. Their life cycle is just 30 years. Now, keep in mind, Japan has, a lot of earthquakes and natural disasters. So their homes are built to be safe in that environment, which may cause the longevity to be a little bit less. But even look at this. Tokyo's home building pace is extraordinary. The prefecture has tripled its housing stock in the last 50 years. Tripled. Think about that for a second, because we are worried about 400,000 immigrants coming to Canada when we have a population of 30 million people. The prefecture that the city of Tokyo is in tripled its housing stock in 50 years. Tripled. So it is definitely possible to create housing to meet the demand. It's just a matter of, can we create the right incentives, and can we reduce the red tape that it takes to create housing? Right now, I've heard some crazy statistics in the city of Toronto. To build a condo, something on the order of $200,000 is spent in the process of getting the permission to build that unit. Obviously, this is in a larger building, but when you divide the cost per unit, so when you're buying a $700,000 condo, keep in mind, 200,000 of that is simply going to the government or to the carrying cost of the developer paying interest to a bank because it's waiting for the land to be approved to be built. A place like Japan, those costs are significantly reduced, and because there's so much construction happening, so much building happening, the consumer gets to choose which is the house that they want to buy. There's more supply, which keeps housing prices low, which keeps rental prices low. I was surprised when I went to Japan that the cost to rent in a large city like Yokohama, which is the second biggest city in Japan, just outside of Tokyo, was cheaper in many cases than in the city of Welland in Ontario, that's like 2 hours from Toronto and has a population of 50,000. Yokohama has like a population north of 2 million people. So in my mind, it is incredibly clear, but it's difficult to do this. It goes against many of the ingrained thoughts that we have as a country, as a population. It will require a lot of change, and I think as we experience more pain when it comes to seeing prices increase rapidly, rents increase rapidly, at some point, this will be the answer that the province and the cities turn to. But it is not an easy political decision because, unfortunately and fortunately, the majority of Canadians own homes, and they are the majority of the voting population. So they get to decide whether explicitly or implicitly politicians need to consider, are they going to be elected if they promote a policy that the majority of their voting base doesn't necessarily want them to. So it is kind of unfortunate the system that we're in, and especially how it segregates the different categories of people, right? When you own a home and there is no rental construction, rents rise, housing prices rise. As the homeowner, you've now benefited from an increase in the equity you have. And this is also the category of people in some way that's restricting new housing from being built. And especially if you're younger, you haven't saved up money yet to buy a house, housing prices are insane. So instead, you're renting. Now, rents are rising and they're going to continue to rise because there isn't enough construction of housing. As a collective group, they are in a much harder situation than it probably was when the current homeowner, the average homeowner, bought their first home. So, again, it's one of those situations, there's no easy answer, but we can learn from other countries and other cities that are doing it well. So, hope you found this video helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to comment below. Until next time, all the best.